The human psyche is really a monophonic instrument. We seldom experience the world in a single unadulterated note. In fact, if we do, it may be cause for concern and greater examination in depth. Our internal lives are characterized by a dense, often conflicting counterpoint of emotions. Grief shot with a dark impulse to laugh, love continuously underscored by minor chords of fear and vulnerability. To view these contradictions as psychological malfunctions is to misunderstand the fundamental texture of our human consciousness. The question is not how do we eliminate the dissonance within ourselves, but instead understand it, and perhaps hold it with a greater softness and tenderness that it might reveal to us greater understanding within ourselves. That question is where art and psychology meet. The concept that perhaps best bridges them is the concept of emotional polyphony, the capacity of a mind or a work of art to sustain multiple emotional registers simultaneously without forcing any of them into resolution. Not ambiguity per se, which is vagueness, and not irony, which is a form of distance and comedy, but a genuine simultaneous arrangement where the tragic and the absurd can occupy the same moment. Dignity and indignity are folded in within each other, held open and unresolved. The term polyphony originates in music, where it describes the technique of an unwavering, multiple independent melodic lines that cohesively create a single composition. Each voice is following its own logic, and none is subordinating itself to the others. Yet together they form something richer and more complex than any single line could produce. The Russian philosopher and literary theorist Mikhail Bakhtin, writing in the early 20th century, borrowed this term to describe what he saw as revolutionary in the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky. Before Dostoevsky, Bakhtin argued the dominant mode of the novel was monophonic. The author functioned as an absolute monarch. The characters, however vivid, were ultimately vessels arranged to validate the author's singular ideological worldview. Even in richly populated novels, one consciousness organized the rest. The author's hand was always legible, shaping events towards meaning. And Dostoevsky dismantled this hierarchy. In his novels, the author steps back and allows the ensemble of fully realized autonomous consciousness to clash on genuinely equal footing. The characters do not serve the thesis, they argue with it, contradict each other, and exist in a state of ongoing, unresolved tension. Each voice carries its own complete internal logic, with its own internal gravity, and no authorial voice or verdict is handed down to adjudicate them. Nowhere is this more perhaps viscerally demonstrated than the brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky's pinnacle magnum opus work. Consider the gathering in the cell of elder Father Zosima, a scene that throws radically incompatible worldviews or melodies into a single room. There is a serene, transcendental love of Zosima himself. There is the scandalous performative buffoonery of the patriarch Fyodor Karamazov, who wallows in deliberate indignity, not out of stupidity, but as a strategy, provoking reactions that feed something hollow in him. And then there is the volatile arguments erupting between Fyodor and his eldest son, Dmitri, fueled by sensual rivalry, money, and resentments that are so old they have calcified into the literal foundations of the character. Dostoevsky does not pick a side. He grants both the abusive father and borderline patricidal son a terrifyingly valid psychological reality. We feel the suffocating texture of their mutual hatred, and the humanity beneath the messiness is preserved without being tidied, without submitted to a moral verdict. The effect is something distant from realism and distinct from moral complexity. It is the experience of being inside a consciousness that refuses the comfort of a dominant note. This is what Bakhtin meant by polyphony, and it is also, if we attend carefully to it, a description of what the mind actually does. The psychologist Richard Schwartz developed a framework called internal family systems to make this parallel explicit for his patients. Internal Family Systems, or IFS for short, proposes that the human mind is not a unified monoculture, but an ecosystem of distinct parts, each with its own perspective, desire, and tragic emotional history, organized around a core capital S self. When viewed through this lens, a single person functions very much like a polyphonic novel. Multiple autonomous voices, each internally coherent, yet coexisting in a structured tension without any one of them being reducible to the others. Within a single individual, one part might act as an anxious treble, frenetically maintaining appearances, forcing experiences into manageable boxes. Another carries the heavy baseline of unprocessed historical loss, slow-moving and pervasive. A third, meanwhile, under sufficient pressure, steps into the chaotic, distracting behavior, something structurally close to the buffoonery of Fyodor Karamazov, not out of malice, but out of a defensive maneuver, keeping the whole system from collapsing under its own weight. What IFS suggests is that the psychological health does not mean silencing these parts to achieve a single flat note of calm within our psyche. It means developing the capacity for the capital S self to act as a conductor, not dissolving the voices per se, but holding them in relation to one another, allowing each to be heard without any one of them taking over the whole. Integration rather than resolution. The goal not to be a simple chord, but a rich harmony. The reason this framework matters for a discussion of art is that it reframes what emotional polyphony means. It is not a technique applied from the outside, a structural feature that demonstrates the sophisticatedness of an author to deploy. It's a mimetic achievement. Polyphonic work resonates because it mirrors the actual architecture of our inner life in all its irreducible multiplicity. We recognize it not because it teaches us something new about ourselves, but because it's shaped like something we already are. Friedrich Nietzsche, in The Birth of Tragedy, described the tension at the heart of all meaningful art, as discussed in our side quest on the Dionysian. It is this continual tension of opposites between the Apollonian, or the drive towards form, clarity, order, and beauty, and the Dionysian, the drive towards chaos, dissolution, ecstatic intensity, and the obliteration of boundaries. His argument was that neither impulse alone produces great art. The purely Apollonian work is beautiful yet cold, technically complete but lacks an oxygen. The purely Dionysian work, on the other hand, is raw and powerful but shapeless, overwhelming and overbearing but not illuminating. What great art requires is the Apollonian framework, strong enough to hold the Dionysian force without breaking it. This is the most useful lens through which to approach the question of what a masterpiece might mean. And it is the question worth taking seriously because the word is used too loosely in our culture. A purely technical definition suggests that a masterpiece is a flawless object, immaculate in execution with nothing in excess and nothing missed. And this is not wrong, exactly. There does have to be a quality of inevitability to a truly great work, a sense that form has been so completely solved. But technical flawlessness alone produces the perfectly balanced equation that mirrors that of a marble finish, impressive yet inert. Many formally accomplished works leave you entirely cold. What separates the merely perfect from the genuinely penetrating is the Dionysian element, the presence of the full contradictory, unresolvable complexity of the human experience within the form. A simple, true statement can be beautiful, but it tends to land with a kind of bluntness. It names the thing without conveying its texture, its contradictions, its simultaneous presence, and its agonizing negotiation with everything else. Grief is isolating, is accurate. It is not sufficient, however. It describes the thing from the outside without inhabiting it from within. The truly great work does not describe that complexity. It contains it. Consider the final pages of the brothers Karamazov, where the novel refuses the emotional resolution its plot seems to have building towards. Instead, it holds the grief and the faith and uncertainty in a single unresolved chord that somehow, impossibly, feels complete. The ending juxtaposes the tragic downfall of the older brothers with a resonant message of spiritual hope delivered by the youngest, Alyosha. While Dmitri is wrongfully convicted for the patricide of his father and plans a desperate escape to America, Yvonne descends into a madness and brain fever from the guilt of possibly indirectly inspiring the murder. Ayusha grounds the novel's final moments in love and redemption, gathering a group of schoolboys at the funeral of young Ilyusha. Alyosha delivers his famous speech at the stone, urging the children to cherish their bond and preserve a single good memory from childhood as a lifelong shield against evil. It is formally perfect, yet emotionally open at the same time. And the Apollonian structure is strong enough to hold the Dionysian chaos without resolving it into something simpler than it needs to be. It has become a cliche to say that great art reaches beyond words, as though what it points to is fundamentally mystical, constitutively inaccessible to explanation. This is not quite right, and it matters that it is not quite right because cliche lets us off the hook from understanding what is actually happening. Jung was off to say that one should beware of unearned wisdom, and cliche, to some extent, enables that. A more precise account of this might be that a masterpiece wraps its arms around the total multi-voiced complexity of human experience and contains it in a way that is entirely detectable. Not beyond language, because language stretched wide enough to hold would otherwise escape. The achievement is structural. Polyphonic work creates a space large enough and stable enough that contradictory emotional truths can coexist within without canceling each other out. It does not transcend the mess of human experience, it provides the architecture for the mess to become legible. And when we encounter a work that does this, when we recognize it, what we are recognizing is our own internal polyphony, reflected back at us with a clarity we could not have produced alone. Contradictions that make us feel incoherent or divided or somehow broken are given form. They are shown to be not errors, but structure, not noise, but counterbalancing forces. A masterpiece, then, is not simply a flawless object, but a well rounded container for something that resists containment. It's an Apollonian form in service of Dionysian truth, technically complete, emotionally open, and shaped like something inside of a human being. That is rare, and that rarity is precisely what we mean when we say something is genuinely great.